In the opening minutes of The Prestige, John Cutter, portrayed by Michael Caine, breaks down the 3 acts of a magic trick. To paraphrase, these are the pledge, when the audience is presented with an ordinary part of their everyday world; the turn, when the magician breaks the ordinary by making what was previously presented do something impossible; finally, there's the prestige, when the magician returns the subject to its ordinary state, leaving the audience to wonder what happened along the path. It's a basic explanation of storytelling, to be honest. The 3-act formula is tried and true for not only stage magic, but also for many narratives that tell their stories in multiple steps. In fact, this formula even works in environmental storytelling. Take the poster child for this type of narrative presentation in gaming, for example. Dark Souls. One of these narratives told is one that the chosen undead plays a key role in. To start with the pledge, the open design of Dark Souls offers a few instances that can act as the initial setup. However, for the sake of argument, I'll count this as the moment that the game establishes and reinforces the existence of these wooden chests. Right off the bat, with the chest in Undead Burg, players are shown that these are rare items that require going off the beaten path to discover, and reward players with rare and powerful items for finding and pilfering. For players who don't start with the Master Key, this means exploring enough to find the Undead Merchant and purchase the Residence Key. This is the Ordinary. Explore and be heavily rewarded for your efforts. Classic Dark Souls, classic FromSoftware from Kingsfield to Evergrace to Elden Ring. Hell, this is a classic feature of game design since Adventure's famous first Easter egg. Several hours later, after players have had multiple chances to run into chests with embers, dragon scales, and spells hidden away inside, Dark Souls prepares the turn. It's sitting right here, in Sen's Fortress. Another chest. This one probably offering even stronger rewards than the previous ones. I mean, we had to get all the way through Undead Parish and Blighttown in order to get here. If killing Quelaag is a requirement for even seeing this thing, then there must be something incredible waiting inside. So, what happens when we open it? Yeah, there it is. The introduction to the Mimic. Right as we're rounding up to the halfway point and have been primed by half a dozen of these things to open them up immediately. And what does it do when we open it without warning? It eats us. Like, absolutely devours us. Completely chomps all over our faces. And potentially unlocks a new fetish. Finally, we get the Prestige, where we return to the Mimic and kill it. We kill it dead. And as a reward, we're given the Lightning Spear, a weapon so powerful it can literally carry new players through the entire game, or can be quickly transformed into 2 incredibly powerful boss weapons. Quite the return to norm, huh? So, with this incredible environmental narrative, with hours and hours worth of build-up leading to the final payoff that redefines the world at play right when players have started to get comfortable, how does FromSoftware and Papa Miyazaki himself elevate this in Dark Souls 3? Oh, that's kinda disappointing, huh? Howdy, I'm Prakuza and welcome to DevBox, where today I want to spend like 30 minutes talking about a single box in Dark Souls 3 that lives rent-free in my brain. It ticks up every time I go fight Margit, and he holds that cane over his head for like 2 minutes before the whip-crack strike he refuses to stagger out of. This thing was in the back of my mind for the entirety of Shadow of the Erdtree. So, I'm gonna pull it up to the front of my mind and explain what I mean when I say that this one chest is the turning point where FromSoftware left me behind. And I don't think I'm alone in that sentiment, as the conversation around the developer and difficulty has been highlighted in recent years. But while there are examples I can grab from the internet and show that there's an entire camp on this side of the fanbase, I don't want to pretend that my own thoughts on FromSoftware are so ubiquitous that I can speak for everyone who plays these games. To start, let's get back to that original Mimic encounter. There's a reason I relate the Mimic encounter to a magic trick's 3-act structure. It's a storytelling device that comes directly as a result of gameplay. Dark Souls is great at these moments that players wind up being able to hold on to and tell as they talk about the game with friends. Your good old, dude, when that dragon swooped over the bridge, or, ONS walled me for like 2 days on my first playthrough. Moments. The way that individual experiences can be both unique but also shared, as more people share their initial or preferred builds and how well they faced off against one boss or another. And then of course there's always the prodding to new players. So, you find any of those big chests yet? Cool stuff in them, right? You find the one in Sen's fortress? This is the power of the initial Mimic in Dark Souls 1. It's a unique part of the experience that every player will have a different story to tell after coming across it. Careful, methodical players might notice the subtle breathing of the chest, or even the difference between the chains from every one of these that has appeared before. And others might see the chest without much thought beyond what cool thing could be inside of it. Honestly, I think some form of the former is the more likely, considering how on edge Dark Souls has kept players up until this point, because that is how FromSoftware has been priming players from the start of the game. But the latter is definitely a lived experience for plenty of us. It's one of the best payoffs in the whole Soulsborne series, because it has hours of gameplay ahead of it that obscures the trap lying in wait. Then comes the DS3 Mimic, the first chest that players will find. There's no priming that chests are something to seek out, no false sense of security about whether or not they can hurt you, the same eventual outcome as in DS1, with players either being eaten or seeing through the trick, but with none of the pomp or circumstance, or let's face it, effort, to make the moment memorable. And yeah, I remember it, because this Mimic has a different intended value than the original, one that has started to paint a trend for FromSoftware, and marks the beginning of a slow decline for the developer in the eyes of some fans. Since DS1, series veterans have adapted a number of habits that have become key to finding FromSoftware's best-kept secrets. We roll into every wall we see, check underneath elevators before going up them, and most importantly of all, every box is taking a swing before we even attempt to open it. This is how we find illusory walls, hidden paths, and avoid getting eaten by another damn Mimic and have to make a 10-minute run back through Sen's Fortress to hopefully get our souls back. These games have ground a sense of care into us, because from the very beginning, even Demon Souls promised that not only could death be waiting around any corner, but every corner. Every single one. So, coming across the very first chest in DS3, I know damn well I wasn't going to open this thing without a second thought. I was going to take a swing, and would you look at that, my old habits were rewarded. Immediately. FromSoftware tried to trick me, to catch me off guard, but I was ready for it. I knew better. I did exactly what they wanted me to do. See, the reason that this Mimic lacks the build-up of this Mimic isn't because FromSoftware is lazy, far from it. These are extremely talented designers, artists, and programmers working on these games. Even the entries in their catalog that I don't like are incredibly well put together. Seemingly a benefit of having much of the same team sticking through production and being properly rewarded by the company employing them. Weird how that tends to make better gaming experience. Sorry, that's a completely different video. To get back on this topic, what FromSoftware does best is designing a feeling of accomplishment. For very small moments, like arriving to a new bonfire or unlocking a shortcut that circumvents the area a player has finished struggling through, to the bombastic bosses that leave players with a feeling of relieved triumph when they face off against these gargantuan enemies and come out the other side victorious. The former is what the DS3 Mimic is. It's a little achievement, rewarding Soulsborne muscle memory with the aha of having guessed the first Mimic correctly. However, in that very same statement lies the real problem on display here. I was being rewarded for my memory of previous games, not for having paid attention in this one. At its core, Dark Souls 3 is an incomplete experience without having already played Dark Souls 1 or even 2 before it, because DS3 isn't built for newcomers to the series, it's built for veterans. ready to reward them for remembering the tricks of the original and pound players into the dirt with even more difficult bosses than ever. On its head, this isn't a bad thing. In my mild defense of Kingdom Hearts 3, I comment on the ways that series isn't exactly built for veterans. Not mechanically, at least. While I do regret being overtly reductive with my reasoning there, I think the point still stands. Square Enix was building a game for a wide audience, hoping to capture the attention of a whole new generation of children and young adults that would be attracted to the latest game starring all of their favorite Disney characters. The new dark side at the start of the game is not meant to push the envelope for difficulty, it's meant to be a spectacle that a younger audience would look at in awe. Beating Xehanort and his Norded minions isn't supposed to be the toughest challenge the series has ever given players. It's supposed to be a purely narrative experience, with a payoff for almost 2 decades of setup at the time of launch. The challenges for veterans were put on the back burner, added later to the game through the new critical mode, easy and pro settings, and eventually with Remind, revamped data bosses, and finally with one of the most difficult bosses I've ever beaten, Yozora. That is the key difference here. Which part of the experience is designed for new players, sometimes even children, and which part is designed with veterans in mind? FromSoftware is looking to make an experience that longtime fans will be newly challenged by, with trials and tribulations set about to reinforce our habits, to reward our ability to recall the previous games. It's something that new players can grow the muscle memory for, forged in the now hottest crucible the developer has conceived so far, but it is built for those who've already passed through the other games that came before. Meanwhile, Square Enix is looking to make something approachable to any and all, with some additional content coming at a later date to offer longtime fans a challenge. It's a design philosophy that has worked for them since Kingdom Hearts 2, if anyone remembers how the conversations around that game have evolved from reaction commands are for babies to lingering will is peak design over the last 2 decades of that game's existence. Now, this is not to say that one of these philosophies is objectively better than others. There are pros and cons to both. In the case of Square Enix, veteran players feel like they aren't being respected, as the games refuse to lift the skill floor as they improve. However, when it comes to FromSoftware, they risk leaving people behind, as they lift the skill floor out of reach. And that's where it feels like I've found myself. I don't want to pretend that this is an objective take on FromSoftware. There are plenty of people who have loved everything the developer has made after DS3, and for many of them, the most recent games are either their favorites or where they started playing. So I am under no delusion that I'm speaking for the majority here, or that my experience is anything but personal and subjective. Alright, disclaimer out of the way, I feel like I'm being left behind by FromSoftware. I didn't like Sekiro, I didn't really like Elden Ring, and have more problems with Shadow of the Erdtree. Real quick note I wanted to make while I was listening back to this while editing. This right here, what you're currently watching, that is my favorite fight from Shadow of the Erdtree. It slaps. Bale is fantastic, and the Great Katana is a stellar weapon. So, as I continue to speak negatively about the DLC, I want it to be made clear that this isn't a disdain for every single thing that the DLC did, simply that I had a overall negative experience. But I also find it great that so many people seem to have loved this game and this new content. There was a lot of hype for it, and it's awesome that a lot of people walked away from it overwhelmingly positive. Hopefully the fact that this wasn't the case for me doesn't affect your own personal enjoyment of the game. And I'm mostly putting this in because I've been seeing a lot of the conversation around Elden Ring and the Shadow of the Erdtree specifically, ending with a lot of people either spitefully defending why they hate it, or spitefully defending why they love it. And I'd rather we get to say what we do or don't like about it, but not have to put an emphasis on why it makes us better for having had our own subjective response to it, and why it makes everyone else worse because, hey, you liked the thing I hated, or you hated the thing I liked, and that means it's a game. It's a video game. Have fun with it, please. Have more fun with it for me. I wanted to have fun with it. Alright, back to the pre-recorded video. These games are, for a lack of a better word, too hard. Actually, I have better words. I'm a writer. In fact, I've been using better words up until now, before falling back on the too hard claim. So let's put some of those better words to better use. In the pursuit to push the Souls-like formula forward, FromSoftware has continued to increase the aggression of enemies. Although, let's be real, we're talking about bosses. These bosses attack faster, keep their combos going for longer, and hold charge attacks without any hope of being staggered out of the windup. All of these things make bosses harder. With less opportunities to punish, fights last longer. Every extra second a fight goes on is another chance for a player to get caught in one of those endless combos and see all of the seconds that passed before be put to waste. It's an escalation of design that can only go so far before it breaks. And I would argue that two bosses in specific have hit the limit of FromSoftware's add more attacks to the combos with less downtime design philosophy. One is even trying admirably to do something new and inventive for the series, to push the envelope outside of a simple reducing the amount of time players have to react inside of. Real quick, before we get into this, there will be some Shadow of the Erdtree spoilers coming up for those still looking to reach the end of the DLC fresh. These would be Millennia, the hardest boss in the base Elden Ring experience, and Promised Consort Radahn, the final boss of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. The issues for Millennia are obvious and have been dissected ad nauseum before. Waterfowl is toxic, her lifesteal is Bennett Foddy levels of infuriating, resetting all of a player's progress for failing to dodge a single attacker combo. This fight is a nightmare, and it only gets worse in the second phase as the boss starts to summon Rot Phantoms and use a Kingdom Hearts-style revenge value to hyper armor through staggers and deliver undodgeable counters. She is punishing in every way possible, and gives the most negative feedback I've ever seen in a boss. Honestly, Millennia might be the boss I hate fighting the most in any game. However, while there's plenty to say about what Millennia gets wrong, the biggest part of it comes down to FromSoftware trying something new, and it coming up short. That's the trouble with taking risks. They don't always pay off, but I still commend the developer for trying. In the case of Consort Radahn, the problem is much more foundational. There's no single attack that breaks this fight. I can't point to one aspect like the lifesteal or waterfowl that makes this unbearable. Instead, it's the whole damn thing. The entire fight. Although most of the problems are pretty contained before Phase 2. See, in the first phase, the attacks are fast, his combos are long, but it's all manageable. That learnable level of stuff. However, in the second phase, he starts popping insane attacks, an almost arena-wide explosion that is followed by individual pillars of light that I could never figure out how to dodge properly. Every attack includes a wholly damaging follow-up that catches early dodges, or even some on-time dodges. This shit. I don't even know what to say about that one, except fuck that hyperspeed nonsense. This is what I mean when I say I feel I've been left behind by FromSoftware. This is the bare limit for what the current combat mechanics of the Souls-like design can do. This is the full extent of stringing combos together for so long that the player has barely any opportunity to respond. And I'll tell you what, I don't find this fun. Not anymore. Not when the damage output of the boss basically requires me to no-hit him while avoiding the longest, most aggressive combos in the history of gaming. It's punishing and cruel in ways that make the experience no longer enjoyable. And I couldn't even beat it myself. Literally. I can't keep up with these games. It's frustrating because I've had to be the Dark Souls defender before, trying to break through the series' reputation as the hard games, where players either get good or quit. But I can't really do that with the more recent titles. What I can do, though, is hope that FromSoftware will see where the outcrying from this fringe of the fan base that I'm speaking from is coming from, and start to steer away from these raw number fights, and start to refocus on what helps their best fights stand out. Spectacles like Gerbin and Maria from Bloodborne, who pit the player against an almost PvP moveset, but with mechanics playing more heavily on the opponent's favor. Nail-biting experiences like Slave Knight Gale or The Nameless King from DS3, who absolutely push the speed and aggression limits of Souls-like combat to their limits. Even puzzle bosses like, well, pretty much everything from Demon's Souls, that are less about getting pinpoint timings and tough-as-nails fights, and more about figuring out the way that the game wants the boss to be approached and following suit until victory comes. So this essay originally ended right here with one final thing to say about FromSoftware as one of the best developers currently working in the industry today. However, as I've sat on this video and made that 4% run, and the Mimic-only run that might be the reason many of you are even watching here in the first place, I've been mulling over my feelings for Elden Ring, and the Souls-like genre itself. Our barely useful genre title for what are essentially 3D Metroidvanias. And I think I have a perfect example of what Elden Ring lacks, that put my favorite titles, either by FromSoftware or elsewhere, at their respective top spots. It's the aggression available to players. Case in point, Hollow Knight, the indiest darling of indie darlings. And boy, does this game run the gambit from rewarding aggression to engendering passivity, to take directly from Bloodborne's own description of the shield. Okay, yeah, I stole it from H-Bomber Guy, sue me. Let me use the lens of my favorite and least favorite bosses in Hollow Knight to examine how giving the player the opportunity to be aggressive helps these fights stand out in positive or negative ways. Starting from the absolute creme de la creme, we've got Pure Vessel, a brutally difficult reimagining of the final boss in his prime. His attacks are faster, his damage is more punishing, and he has a new array of arena-spanning AoEs that force careful positioning. However, behind all of that damage and speed, the Pure Vessel spends most of the fight standing on one side of the arena or the other, sending out attacks and then periodically warping to the other side. He might throw out a move or two that makes it impossible to attack greedily in that moment, but he is always there, ready to be punished. The pace of the fight is entirely on the side of the player. We are allowed to be as aggressive as we want, smashing away at the Pure Vessel with attack after attack after attack. Will a mistimed attack get us killed by one of the bosses? Absolutely. There's always a risk with any enemy taking advantage of recovery windows or the opportunity given when the player is overly greedy. Still, the fact remains that aggression is rewarded, not only with a quicker victory, but also the immediate feedback of hits connecting that Hollow Knight is so good at. The boss flashes, the knight is pushed slightly back. Don't use steady body, it's a trap. That whip crack of contact rings out over the soundtrack. It's, to continue to overuse one of my favorite writing tropes, a dance between two masters of their own physical arts, with the winner being the one who stays in step the best until the song ends. An experience that encompasses that slim wedge of the Venn diagram between beauty and sublime that so much art strives for. Now, for the bottom of the barrel, we've got Nightmare King Grim. Shit, I can already hear those keyboards clacking away in the comments. Soul Master or Soul Tyrant. Honestly, take your pick between those two. They're both frustrating. This is a fight that is played entirely on the boss's schedule. Soul Master decides when you can attack, when you need to dodge, and where you need to stand. There is no agency for the player to move as needed to push combat according to their preferred playstyle. There is only the ability to sit there, passively, wait for your one or two opportunities to attack, and get that tiny amount of feedback. One clawing strike at a time. Then, fall back on the defensive, and wait for the boss to decide when the appropriate time to respond has arisen. It's frustrating to be made to wait for so long with only tiny windows of opportunity to ever engage with the rest of the fight. It's this need to wait my damn turn, like this is classic Final Fantasy pretending to be an action title, that makes me hate Consort Radahn, or any other Elden Ring boss, or Nightmare King, Soul Master. It's a realization that doesn't exactly stick with everything I don't like about FromSoftware games after Dark Souls 3. I know that it's what I don't like about the toughest bosses in Elden Ring, the game where every fight is 15 minutes of dodging, briefly interrupted by pressing R1 once. But I'm not exactly sure if it's the same problem I have with Sekiro. That may have to be a totally different video. However, for now, we're sticking with the aggression and the fact that the more FromSoftware pushes their bosses to be more aggressive, it forces players to then be less aggressive. To, as the shield says again, engender passivity. It's a moving away from the type of playstyle that fuels the developer's best title in the last 20 years. FromSoftware is clearly a developer that loves its players, trying to push the experience in ways that fans continue to ask for. And that's not something I think I can say for every developer. I brought up Square Enix earlier and how they listen almost too closely to what fans ask for. but there's definitely a miscommunication between the creative folks making those games and the execs shoving microtransaction garbage into as many of them as they can. So it's hard to say that Square as a whole has the player in mind as much as FromSoftware seems from pitch to release. Which is exactly why it's important for those of us being left behind by the developer to speak up and express how we're falling off, and why the developer might not be able to depend on us moving forward. Because if FromSoftware is still going to be confidently placing mimics front and center to reward us for being paranoid of the developer constantly trolling us, then I'm tired of being trolled. And I might have to unfortunately skip whatever this wonderful development team tries to curate for everyone but me next. The problem with all of this, however, is what I feel is expected of this type of video. What's the fix? How does FromSoftware shape up to impress me again? How does Elden Ring 2 change to keep fans that enjoyed the last game while not leaving the rest of us behind? What should any developer do while building a game to avoid running into this problem and slipping the skill window out of reach for the intended audience? That's the rub. It's hard to say if there even is a perfect answer, and I know damn well I haven't thought of one yet, even after working on this damn video for more than a month and a half. As far as I can see it, the solution to this problem is to make a choice between those who haven't fallen off the train yet with the hope that hype might still bring on enough new fans to keep steam in the engine, and those that have stuck around for this long, even if it means that those expecting things to continue elevating with each new title start to drop off as the series stagnates. The former is likely better than the latter, but boy, does it suck to be one of those folks getting shoved off because the train is moving too fast for us, or because it keeps missing the stops we continue to ask for. But hey, that's a story for another time. Hey, it's that time again, the end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon link in the description, and make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content, and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledge $5 or more get their names read out, like Azul. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching.